as Patrick said, we've got a stacked agenda here. So I really appreciated both Karen and Caitlin giving us sort of the lay of the land, as well as that both of their bodies of research not only focus on education requirements when educators enter the classroom, but also on those ongoing preparation and professional development opportunities. And as they shared, there are certainly disparities in those professional development opportunities, as well as compensation opportunities for career advancement. And so our next panel of experts is going to discuss some of these disparities and how they potentially harm both educators and children, and share opportunities and their work on helping to advance professionalization of the early workforce. So I am very happy to introduce our panel here. We have a lot of expertise on this panel. We'll be joined by Valora Washington, who has a long history in this field, but whose current role is as the founder and CEO of the Community Advocates for Young Leaders, or CAYL Institute. And then we'll also be joined by Daphna Bassick, who is an associate professor of education and public policy at the University of Virginia, also the associate director of Ed Policy Works, which is a joint collaboration between the schools of education and human development and leadership, focusing on education and labor policy. And we'll also be joined by Lauren Hogan, the managing director of policy and professional advancement with the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Thank you all for being with us. I'm going to hand it over first to Valora.
Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen. It's the wrong show. Sorry. One more time. The right show doesn't seem to be loaded, but I can do it without it. This session is titled Opportunities to Professionalize the Field of Early Childhood Education. And the agenda then describes the content of the session this way. It says, early learning teachers face many disparities, and promises that this session will discuss why these disparities hurt children and educators. And indeed, that's what we're going to do. But notice the term disparities is the key descriptor in a session about opportunities to professionalize the early learning workforce. And actually, it's the perfect descriptor. Disparities. As an early childhood educator for the past 40 years, disparate is almost the very definition of the profession, more so in community-based settings, but also in public schools, where preschool and the staff who work in those rooms are too often seen as an add-on rather than as an integral part of the school system. Following this panel, you're going to hear from the Boston Public Schools, which is exemplary, largely because it is so exceptional. But it doesn't have to be this way. At this point, we want to make in this session today, the point we want to make is that your leadership as state legislators really can make a difference. The Merriam-Webster dictionary says that disparity contains the Latin words dis, meaning apart, and not. So a disparity is a kind of not equality or non-equality, and it's used to describe serious, unfair inequalities. And its adjective, disparate, is often used to emphasize strong differences. And this is exactly the situation that we find in the early learning workforce, especially when we compare them to their K-12 colleagues in their preparation, compensation, and opportunities for career advancement. So what we're going to talk about briefly today is the impact of these disparities on children, always keeping children in the center of the conversation because that's what we're here for. We're going to talk about workforce disparities and their impact on educators. We're going to largely draw from the data sources you heard about in the first panel just to keep the data comparable. And then we're going to share with you a few ideas on pathways forward and what the real opportunities are to professionalize this field and ways that you as a state legislator can make a difference. So let's look at three big indicators that we've been asked to talk about. And the first is preparation. So it's common knowledge that in the K-12 system, people are expected at a minimum to have a bachelor's degrees. And in many school districts, shortly thereafter, so many years of service, they're also expected to get a master's degree. And While in the early care and education, especially in pre-K programs, as you heard earlier, there are many, many people and requirements for bachelor's degrees. The fact of the matter is, it's not largely implemented in early care and education policy. So despite the fact that there's so much professional recognition about the importance of qualifications and requirements across the states, this is very low and uneven depending on the type of setting you work in and the funding of programs. And as a result, what educators are typically required to do has very little to do with expert expectations. When we look at compensation, we see similar situation in that equal pay for equal work and equal qualifications might be an ideal, but in the early childhood arena, it's far from an achievement. What you heard earlier is that preschool teachers in all settings earn about $12 an hour, kindergarten teachers earn about $23 an hour, and elementary teachers earn about $32 an hour. And this is a significant inequality or disparity for people who consistently work in the same field, since early childhood is basically identified and defined as birth to age 8 or 3rd grade. So what this non-equality means is economic distress for early childhood educators who are disproportionately people of color and who are also working with the youngest children who are infants and toddlers. This non-equality also means that when people are working full-time, they still can't make their ends meet. For a single adult with one child, as we see from the data for the Center for the Study of the Early Childhood Workforce, people who are working full-time with one child, in no state do they make the living wage in any state in the United States of America. And their poverty rates then are very high, ranging from about 11% in Virginia and 34% in Florida, whereas poverty rates for K-8 teachers is about less than 1% in Virginia and about 6% in Florida. This non-equality also devalues an entire field of work because it's based largely on a market-based system that depends on parents' ability to pay. And early childhood education, as you already heard, is one of the most underpaid fields in the country. So as a result, people who choose to go into this field really have a huge pay penalty. You've already heard they have an average of 8 times higher poverty rates than teachers in public schools. And this inequality hits women of color really, really hard because about 40% of early educators are people of color, and they occupy the lowest paying jobs in the field. And yes, even in this impoverished field, there is a racial wage gap in which Black early childhood educators are paid 78 cents less per hour. So all of this means there's a pay penalty for choosing this line of work, even if you have a bachelor's degree. And the difference in wages can be even $17,000 a year for people with bachelor's degree. And when you think about career advancement, you see similar disparities. Again, in the public school system, there are systems that have to do with salary schedules based on levels of education, paid professional development, planning time, access to benefits. They have unions and other professional organizations that help to voice their opinions. And all of these things are pretty lacking in the early childhood world. So when we think about these disparities and why they matter, we have to go back to thinking about our children and the consequences on our entire generation of children, the children we're caring for and educating today, the alpha generation, those children born since 2010, and they are clearly impacted by these kinds of disparities. These disparities hurt children. What we know about this alpha generation is that they're very diverse, they're very tech immersed, they have very fluid families, they're globally connected. What we can expect life to be like in their adult world is very different. And so they're going to be a transformative generation. And we need to make sure that they have the best teachers working with them and the highest quality that's going to prepare them for the world they go to. But these alpha generation children are harmed because as a society, we invest so much less in children the younger they are. Among center-based teachers, people who work with infants and toddlers are paid over $8,000 a year less than people who work with preschool kids. And this is a disparity that especially hurts Black women because they are more likely to work with infants and toddlers, and Black, Latina, and immigrant women more likely to work in home-based settings where there are more infants and toddlers. And all of our children are harmed because most children today attend some kind of early childhood program, and a low quality system denies them the kind of opportunities that early childhood education has been demonstrated to produce. Our children are harmed because of these disparities because finding childcare is a daunting task for just about everybody. And we also know that these kind of disparities result in half of children of all income levels experiencing multiple and unreliable childcare arrangements. And if you do find a program, it's likely to strain the family budget, 1/5 of your household income. And the program you find is likely to be of uneven quality with undercompensated and ill-equipped staff. And our nation is out of step with comparable nations because most OECD nations already offer universal or near universal childcare, and we don't. And the direct beneficiaries of early childhood education, which is these alpha generation children, cannot vote for their own needs, and the political influence of early childhood advocates has been relatively weak. You've already surmised how the workforce itself is impacted. This work of caring for and teaching young children is very skilled, requires a lot of skills, it's very complex, even more so for the alpha generation, yet employment doesn't help them generate the wages that lets them meet their own basic needs. And we see that early educators have a high rate of using public assistance programs like CHIP and SNAP and TANF. And this in itself tells you a lot about the status of this workforce. So professionalizing this workforce is really important for educators as well as for children. But there's a lot that can be done. This is not a hopeless situation, nor does it have to stay this way. So solutions begin when we respect and honor the early childhood education, and there are many pathways forward. Early educators' working conditions and pay are not inevitable, but they're a product of the policy choices that have consistently let down the women, mostly women who are doing the work. And with systems change and policy change, we can change this and make this field more attractive now and in the future and better prepared to meet the needs of the alpha generation. And that is what we must do. So with our policies, the policies that you can make a difference in your states, we can be architects of the change that we want. So here are a few ideas about what you can do in your roles as state legislators. We need your support to help us think about the qualifications and educational supports that the workforce needs. How can we provide more scholarship funds, more support for people to have access to higher paying jobs and be able to have the skills that we need? How can your policies really improve the environmental standards that really educators have to work under? How can your policies hold programs accountable for having a safe, supportive work environments? Your policies can make a difference in compensation and financial relief. There's a lot of that's happening in various states along this area. And so again, your public policy work can support better compensation. In states, it's also important that you're collecting the data that helps us do the analysis and see progress as it's being made. I also talk a lot about how other things could be helpful in this arena, such as family leave and family support, income supports for childcare, and many other things. So often, all of these things that would help the early childhood workforce professionalize are often sidelined. There's a lot of activity that's going on, but it is not nearly enough. Not nearly enough progress has been made. So we have had success. We are improving. But I think it's really important to understand that the system or non-system that exists today is reinforcing a lot of gender, class, and racial disparities in our country. that we have to think about solutions in terms of these systems that need to be dismantled, not in terms of the qualities of any individuals and whether the individuals are doing good or bad, but think about it more from a systems approach. And I think when we acknowledge these systemic disparities, that's when we open the door to opportunities to professionalize the early learning workforce. Thank you.